Congratulations on your nomination and welcome. There's been some discussion of sort of whether or not diplomacy or our country's policy should be the spreading of human rights and the somehow vanquishing of human rights abusers around the world as our policy, or whether it should be more realistic. There have been many voices saying, well, really needs to be the preeminent part of our foreign policy to vanquish those who are human rights abusers. But I guess, while we're all for that, and we're all for the notion that we wish there weren't these human rights abuses around the world, sometimes I think that policy leads to unintended consequences. So, for example, was Colonel Gaddafi a human rights abuser? I don't probably think there's any question he probably was. Would we wish there'd be someone better involved in running Libya? Yes. But after his negotiating away his nuclear weapons, there are some ramifications that we're still living with. The West toppled him anyway. The message that sent to North Korea and the message that sent to Iran was, you know what, if you get rid of your nuclear weapons, you may well be toppled by the West. And so I guess my question to you is, in balancing sort of the realism of how the world is and how we see it with human rights, would you say that there were unintended consequences of toppling Gaddafi in Libya?
Absolutely, Senator. I think we're seeing them on a daily basis.
Same would go with regard to Iraq. Hussein was accused of gassing the Kurds, using chemical weapons. We've had another instance of that now. And so everybody would say, well, Hussein was a terrible person we should get rid of. The problem is it also led to unintended consequences that I think now the same people who want to get rid of Hussein now want to get rid of the government of Iran, and Iran is emboldened because of the counterbalance of Iraq being gone. So to every action there is a reaction, and an unintended one. And I think that it's important that we have people involved in the State Department who understand that your job, as I see it, is diplomacy, not war. Now, it doesn't say we don't have military might and that we don't have the expression of that and the potential threat of that, but we've got plenty of voices for that. My hope is that yours will be a voice for diplomacy and that you recognize that is your role, or the job description, or part of it other than the management of the State Department, is that the State Department in general is supposed to be about diplomacy. And if you could comment on sort of the role of the State Department in diplomacy in general terms, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly. Thank you, Senator Paul. Yes, I think that is emphatically the mission of the State Department, and I think our Secretary of Defense, Secretary Mattis, would agree with that. And I was originally nominated to work for Secretary Mattis at the Defense Department. I have a fundamentally different job at the State Department, fundamentally different mission, which I'm committed to. With respect to our most recent discussions, I think that concerns about the use of military force in forcing regime change, for example, are very serious concerns. Use of military force should only be as a last resort when our vital national interests are at stake. But there's no diminution of our commitment to our fundamental values as Americans, on which our foreign policy, our diplomacy, that you and I agree should be at the heart of what we do, is based.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that's the point in the discussion of realism versus human rights. We should never shy away from saying and representing and being the symbol of freedom and liberty around the world and justice. But at the same time, if we as our foreign policy say we are going to topple every regime that has a human rights abuse, we'll be at war with about 50 countries right now. And the unintended consequences, one, of bankrupting the country, but two, of getting us involved in wars for which we have no answer and there is no end, would be interminable. So I think the overall debate on realism, and many have tried to sort of cast aspersions on Tillerson's comments, but I think he was recognizing that there is a balance. We never give up on what we stand for, and that we are this shining light as a free nation, but we also don't need to be naive enough that we think that we are somehow the descendants of Wilsonian, let's make the world safe for democracy. If we're unwilling to look at the ramifications of our involvement around the world, and particularly getting involved in another war in Yemen, whether it will be better or worse for us, I have cautioned that in Yemen, I have a fear that we get involved in a war that both sides are beaten down and Al-Qaeda shows up the same way ISIS showed up in Syria, ready to pick up the pieces of the chaos there. And that if we don't think that through in advance and don't think that there got to be a diplomatic arm to our government, that we're making a big mistake. But I wish you well, and I hope you will be one of the sane voices for diplomacy.
We will make America great again.